I once made the most powerful man in New York lose everything he thought mattered. At least that's what the headlines said. The ballroom lights shimmered above me like captured stars, reflecting off crystal chandeliers worth more than the first apartment I ever rented. Hundreds of people filled the room. CEOs, politicians, investors, people who measured success in stock prices and private flights. Yet when I stepped onto the stage, every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward me. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy blue dress and looked out across the crowd. 6 years ago, I would have never belonged in a room like this. 6 years ago, I was working 12-hour shifts at a children's hospital, surviving on coffee and determination. 6 years ago, I was in love with Ethan Morey. The host smiled as he handed me the award. The applause echoed through the room, polite at first, then growing louder. Cameras flashed from every direction. I forced myself to smile. "Thank you," I said into the microphone. My voice sounded calm, strong, nothing like the terrified woman I used to be. People often ask me how I built Brooks Foundation from nothing. A few guests nodded. They already knew the story, or at least the version that appeared in magazines. The self-made entrepreneur, the philanthropist, the woman who turned pain into purpose. But they didn't know the truth. Not really. My fingers tightened around the crystal award. The truth is, I paused. The silence stretched across the room. Everything I built started with a betrayal. A ripple moved through the audience. Curious looks. Raised eyebrows. Somewhere near the back, a champagne glass froze halfway to someone's lips. I could almost feel the tension growing. 6 years ago, I continued, I trusted someone with my entire heart. And one night, I overheard a conversation that changed my life forever. The room became impossibly quiet. Even the photographers stopped moving. "That night," I said softly, "I lost the man I loved." My eyes drifted across the ballroom, across the expensive suits and polished smiles. Then they stopped, because standing near the entrance, perfectly still, was a man I hadn't seen in years. Tall, immaculate black suit, dark hair touched by the faintest hint of silver at the temples. Ethan Morey. My pulse stumbled. For a second, the room disappeared. The applause, the lights, the music, all of it faded beneath the weight of those familiar green eyes. Eyes that once made me feel safe. Eyes that once made me believe in forever. Ethan wasn't looking at the stage. He wasn't looking at the award. He was looking directly at me. And for the first time in 6 years, I realized he had finally found me. I should have been celebrating. The applause was still echoing through the ballroom. People were standing, smiling, raising glasses in my direction. Yet all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. Ethan Morey was here. 6 years. 6 long years, and somehow the sight of him still stole the air from my lungs. I forced myself to finish my speech. I thanked the sponsors. I thanked the volunteers. I smiled for photographs. Then I stepped away from the microphone before anyone could notice my hands trembling. The moment I reached the side of the stage, I looked toward the entrance again. He was gone. Just like that. As if I had imagined him. As if my mind had pulled him from some hidden corner of memory and placed him there to haunt me. But I knew better. Ethan Morey was many things. A billionaire. A businessman. A man whose name opened doors across the world. But he was never a ghost. When Ethan appeared somewhere, it was because he intended to be there. A reporter approached me before I could leave. She smiled brightly and held up her recorder. "Miss Brooks, one quick question. What inspired you to start the foundation?" I almost laughed, because the real answer was standing somewhere outside this building. The real answer had green eyes and a voice I had spent years trying to forget. Instead, I gave the answer everyone expected. "Hope," I said. Sometimes the worst moments in life can become the reason you build something beautiful. The reporter smiled. The cameras flashed. Nobody knew how close I had come to telling the truth. An hour later, I sat alone in the back seat of my town car, as Manhattan drifted past the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. I closed my eyes. That was always my mistake. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered him. Not the man people feared. Not the businessman on magazine covers. The Ethan I remembered was different. He used to leave coffee outside my apartment door before early shifts. He remembered the names of every child on my hospital floor. He knew I hated thunderstorms. Every time lightning flashed outside my window, my phone would ring. The same voice. Low. Calm. You okay? Back then I thought I knew him. I thought I knew the man behind the expensive suits and impossible wealth. Looking back now, maybe that was the cruelest part. The fact that he made it so easy to trust him. My phone buzzed in my purse. I glanced down at the screen. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then another message appeared. And another. The driver slowed at a red light while my stomach tightened. Slowly, I opened the first message. There were only 4 words. 4 simple words that instantly transported me 6 years into the past. We need to talk. Ethan. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Outside, rain continued to fall across the city. Inside, every wall I had spent 6 years building suddenly felt a little less strong. Because for the first time since I disappeared, Ethan Morey was no longer searching for me. He had found me. I did not answer the message. Not that night. Not the next morning either. I stared at those 4 words more times than I wanted to admit, but I never replied. Instead, I found myself standing in my kitchen at 6 o'clock the next morning, watching coffee drip into a mug while memories I had buried years ago began rising to the surface. The problem with seeing Ethan again was not anger. Anger would have been easier. Anger creates distance. What frightened me was how quickly I remembered the good parts. 6 years earlier, I was 23 years old and working back-to-back shifts at St. Matthew Children's Hospital in Brooklyn. My apartment was barely 600 square feet. The radiator made strange noises every winter. The elevator only worked when it felt like it. But I loved that little apartment because it was mine. Every bill, every piece of furniture, every achievement belonged to me. Then Ethan Morey walked into my life. The funny thing was that I had no idea who he really was when we met. To me, he was simply the man sitting beside a little girl in the pediatric wing every Tuesday afternoon. The first time we spoke, he was trying to assemble a toy castle from a complicated instruction booklet. The castle looked like it had survived a natural disaster. I laughed before I could stop myself. He looked up from the pile of plastic pieces and smiled. You seem very confident for someone who has not offered any help. That smile should have been my warning. Some people walk into a room and change the temperature. Ethan was one of those people. Over the following weeks I kept seeing him. Sometimes in the hospital cafeteria. Sometimes reading to children in treatment rooms. Sometimes simply sitting quietly beside worried families. He never talked about himself. Never bragged. Never mentioned private jets or billion-dollar companies. If anything, he seemed uncomfortable discussing money. We became friends first. Then something more. Looking back now, I think that was why losing him hurt so much. He did not feel like a powerful man. He felt like home. I remembered rainy nights when he would bring takeout after my shift ended. I remembered long walks through Central Park. I remembered how he listened when I talked about my patients. Most people nodded politely. Ethan actually remembered every detail. Every name. Every dream. Every fear. He paid attention in a way that made me feel seen. That was the Ethan I loved. The Ethan who knew I preferred vanilla ice cream over chocolate. The Ethan who sent flowers to my mother on her birthday. The Ethan who once drove 3 hours just to surprise me after a difficult week. Which was exactly why what happened next shattered me. Because when someone you barely know disappoints you, it hurts. But when someone you trust completely breaks your heart, it changes the way you see the world. And at that point, I still believed our future was already written. I had no idea that one conversation was about to destroy everything. The conversation happened on a Thursday night in early October. I remember because the air smelled like rain and the city was wrapped in that strange quiet that settles over Manhattan just before a storm arrives. Ethan had invited me to dinner at his penthouse. By then we had been together for almost a year. Long enough that I knew where he kept the coffee mugs. Long enough that his security staff greeted me by name. Long enough that I had stopped questioning how a man could be so wealthy and still seem so lonely when nobody was watching. I arrived just after 7. The elevator opened directly into his apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. Everything felt normal, comfortable, familiar. Ethan met me with a smile and kissed my forehead before disappearing into his office to take what he called a quick business call. I remember laughing because his quick calls were never quick. 20 minutes later I was still waiting. I wandered toward the kitchen and poured myself sparkling water. That was when I heard his voice. The office door was not fully closed. I was not trying to listen. At least not at first. Then I heard my name. Every instinct told me to keep walking. Instead I stopped. Keep her close until the agreement is finalized. Ethan's voice was calm, controlled, the way it always became when discussing business. My stomach tightened. There was a pause before he spoke again. She does not know anything. And she cannot find out before this is finished. The glass nearly slipped from my hand. I stood frozen in the hallway. The city lights blurred beyond the windows. My heartbeat thundered inside my ears. Another voice answered through the speakerphone. I could not make out the words. Ethan responded immediately. I know exactly what I am doing. Trust me. Silence followed. Then a chair moved across the floor. Panic shot through me. I hurried back toward the living room before he could open the door and find me standing there. Seconds later he appeared. Calm. Relaxed. Smiling. The same man I loved. The same man whose voice had just turned my world upside down. The rest of dinner felt like a performance. He talked about an upcoming charity project. I nodded. He asked about my patience. I answered automatically. Every smile felt heavier than the one before it, because one question kept repeating inside my mind. Was any of this real? Or had I simply become part of some arrangement I never understood? When dinner ended, Ethan walked me to the elevator. He brushed a strand of hair from my face and told me he loved me. Those words should have comforted me. Instead they hurt, because for the first time I did not know whether to believe them. And later that night, lying awake in my apartment while rain tapped against the windows, I made the mistake that changed everything. I decided to find out what agreement Ethan Morey had been talking about. The next morning, I woke up after barely 2 hours of sleep. Rain still clung to the windows of my apartment, turning the October sunrise into a gray blur. My phone sat on the nightstand beside me. 3 missed calls from Ethan. 2 messages. I could not bring myself to open either one. Instead I got dressed and went to work. Children needed medications. Families needed reassurance. Life continued whether my heart was breaking or not. For most of the day I convinced myself I was overreacting. There had to be another explanation. Ethan had never lied to me before. At least not that I knew of. Maybe the agreement was a business deal. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe fear was filling in details that were not really there. Then just before lunch everything changed. I was organizing patient charts when my friend Melissa rushed into the break room holding her phone. You are never going to believe this, she said. She sat beside me and turned the screen around. A business magazine article filled the display. The headline mentioned Ethan Morey. Normally I would have smiled. Normally I would have felt proud. Instead my stomach dropped. The article described a massive corporate merger scheduled to be finalized within weeks. Billions of dollars. International partners. Endless legal negotiations. I barely understood half the terminology. Then I noticed a photograph. Ethan stood beside several executives. During a private event held months earlier. One of the women in the picture looked familiar. Very familiar. I had seen her before. Not in person. In photographs. At charity galas. Business interviews. Industry magazines. Her name was Victoria Sinclair. According to the article, her family controlled a significant percentage of the merger. More importantly, rumors had circulated for months that Victoria and Ethan were expected to announce an engagement after the agreement was finalized. I read the sentence 3 times. Then a 4th. My hands became cold. The room seemed to tilt. Melissa kept talking, unaware of what was happening inside my head. Can you imagine marrying into that kind of money? She joked. I could not answer. All I could hear was Ethan's voice from the night before. Keep her close until the agreement is finalized. She does not know anything. Suddenly every piece fit together in the worst possible way. The late night calls. The secrets. The business meetings he never discussed. The parts of his life he kept carefully separated from me. By the time my shift ended, I felt sick. Ethan called again while I walked home. I watched his name appear on the screen. For a moment I almost answered. Almost gave him the chance to explain. Then I remembered the article. The photograph. The rumors. The agreement. My thumb hovered over the screen before I silenced the call. That evening, as darkness settled across the city, I sat alone at my kitchen table staring at the engagement ring Ethan had given me 3 months earlier. The diamond caught the light from the lamp above. It looked beautiful, expensive, perfect, and for the first time I wondered if it had ever truly belonged to me. 3 days later, I found myself sitting alone in a medical office staring at a piece of paper that changed my life forever. Outside the window, autumn leaves drifted across the parking lot. Cars came and went. People hurried through ordinary afternoons. The world kept moving. Mine stopped. I looked down at the test results again. Then again. As if the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something easier to accept. They did not. I was pregnant. For several seconds I could not breathe. 1,000 emotions collided inside me at once. Fear. Shock. Confusion. Hope. Then heartbreak. Because the first person I wanted to tell was Ethan. The same man I no longer trusted. Tears blurred my vision as I walked back to my apartment that evening. The city felt different somehow. Louder. Colder. Every couple I passed on the sidewalk felt like a reminder of everything I thought I had lost. My phone had become a collection of unanswered messages. Ethan called every day. Sometimes twice. Sometimes 10 times. He left voicemails asking if I was okay. Asking what happened. Asking me to talk to him. I listened to every single one. Then I deleted them without responding. The more he searched for answers, the more convinced I became that he was hiding the truth. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and a cup of tea that had long gone cold. In front of me rested the engagement ring. Beside it sat a small photograph Ethan and I had taken 6 months earlier at a charity event. We looked happy. Real. The kind of happy people spend their whole lives searching for. I picked up the photograph and studied his face. The smile. The eyes. The familiar warmth. Then I remembered the article. The rumors. The conversation outside the office door. Slowly, I placed the photograph face down. My hand drifted to my stomach. The baby was still only a secret. A tiny heartbeat I had not even heard yet. But suddenly nothing mattered more. For the first time since meeting Ethan, my future was no longer only mine. Every decision would affect someone else. Someone innocent. Someone depending on me. I realized then that trust was not the only thing that had been broken. Safety had been broken too. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was right. But if there was even a chance that I had become part of some arrangement I never understood, I could not risk my child's future on hope. Near midnight, I opened my laptop and began searching for jobs outside New York. Hospitals. Clinics. Non-profit organizations. Anywhere far enough away to disappear. By 2 in the morning, I had submitted applications in 3 different states. By sunrise, I had accepted an interview in Seattle. Everything happened quickly after that. Almost as if some hidden part of me had already made the decision before my mind caught up. A week later, I stood inside my apartment one final time. The rooms were mostly empty. Boxes lined the walls. Rain tapped softly against the windows. I slipped the engagement ring into a small envelope and placed it on the kitchen counter. Then I walked out the door carrying 2 suitcases and a secret Ethan Morey did not know existed. The flight to Seattle took a little over 5 hours, but emotionally it felt like crossing an ocean. I spent most of it staring out the window at clouds stretching endlessly beneath the wings. Somewhere behind me was New York. Somewhere behind me was Ethan. Every mile placed more distance between us, yet I could not escape the feeling that I was carrying him with me anyway. The city greeted me with cold air and steady rain. I found a small apartment above a bookstore on a quiet street lined with maple trees. The rent was affordable. The furniture was mismatched. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor practicing piano every evening. It was nothing like the life I had left behind. That was exactly why I chose it. The first few months were difficult. Morning sickness arrived without warning. My savings disappeared faster than I expected. I worked long shifts at a non-profit pediatric clinic while trying to build a future from scratch. Some nights I cried myself to sleep from exhaustion. Other nights I cried because I missed someone I was trying desperately to forget. Through it all, Ethan never stopped searching. At least that was what I heard. Mutual acquaintances occasionally mentioned his name. A former coworker told me he had contacted several hospitals looking for me. Another said he had hired private investigators. Each story made my chest tighten, but none of them changed my decision. If he truly cared, I told myself, he would have told me the truth from the beginning. Winter arrived. Then spring. The day my son was born. Sunlight poured through the hospital windows. I remember holding him for the first time and feeling the entire world shift beneath me. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine with surprising strength. His eyes remained closed as he slept peacefully against my chest. In that moment, every sacrifice suddenly made sense. Every fear, every lonely night, every tear. I named him Noah. The first year passed in a blur of diapers, bottles, sleepless nights, and small miracles. His first smile. His first laugh. His first steps across the living room floor. With every passing month, he looked more like Ethan. The same dark hair. The same thoughtful expression whenever he concentrated. Sometimes I caught glimpses of those familiar green eyes and had to look away. Not because I regretted Noah. Never that. But because some wounds never fully disappear. They simply learn how to live quietly beside you. By the time Noah turned 5, my life looked nothing like the one I had fled. The foundation had grown beyond anything I imagined. What began as a small support program for struggling mothers expanded into multiple centers across the Pacific Northwest. Donations increased. Partnerships formed. Opportunities multiplied. People started calling me successful, resilient, inspiring. They saw the finished building. They never saw the foundation buried underneath. Then one afternoon, while reviewing contracts in my office, my assistant entered carrying a folder. She placed it on my desk with a puzzled expression. "You might want to see this," she said. I opened the folder and immediately froze. Across the top of the page was a familiar name, Mori International, and beneath it, an invitation requesting a private meeting. For the first time in 6 years, our worlds were about to collide. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. Seattle's sky hung low and gray outside my office windows, the kind of weather that made the entire city feel wrapped in mist. I had spent 6 years preparing myself for this moment. At least that was what I told myself. The truth became obvious the second I stepped into the conference room and saw Ethan standing there. Nothing could have prepared me for seeing him again up close. Time had changed him. There were faint lines near his eyes now. More silver threaded through his dark hair. His suit was as immaculate as ever, but something else had changed too. He looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had spent years carrying a weight nobody else could see. The room suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. Ethan looked at me the way a man looks at sunlight after years underground. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he broke the silence. "You disappeared." His voice was lower than I remembered. Rougher somehow. I folded my arms. "You seem surprised." Pain flickered across his face before disappearing behind the calm expression I knew so well. "I searched for you." The words landed harder than I expected. "That was your choice." His jaw tightened. "No, Nia. Losing you was never my choice." I looked away before he could see the crack forming in my composure. We spent the next hour discussing the partnership proposal. Numbers. Programs. Expansion opportunities. Anything except the 6 years standing between us. Yet every conversation felt like a performance. Every glance carried unfinished history. Then the meeting finally ended. Ethan gathered his documents slowly, almost reluctantly, like he knew the moment he walked out that door he might lose me again. "There is something you should know," he said quietly. My stomach tightened. "I do not think there is anything left to say." His eyes met mine. There is. Before I could respond, a familiar voice echoed from the hallway outside. Mom! The door swung open. Noah stepped inside carrying the backpack he had forgotten in my office earlier that morning. He stopped immediately when he noticed a stranger standing near my desk. Ethan froze. Completely froze. Noah looked up at me with those unmistakable green eyes. The same eyes I had spent years trying not to remember. For a moment nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I felt my pulse hammering inside my chest. Noah smiled politely. Sorry, Mom. I forgot my science project. Ethan stared at him as if the entire world had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. His gaze moved from Noah's face to mine, then back again. Understanding arrived slowly, then all at once. I watched the exact moment the truth reached him. The color drained from his face. His hand tightened around the folder he was holding. And for the first time since I had known him, Ethan Morey looked completely speechless. Noah looked between us with the curiosity only a 6-year-old could have. Mom, he repeated. The sound of his voice finally broke the silence. I forced a smile and walked toward him. Why do not you wait outside for a minute, sweetheart? I will be right there. Noah nodded and disappeared into the hallway, leaving the door partially open behind him. The second he was gone, Ethan sat down as if his legs could no longer support him. He stared at the doorway where Noah had vanished. Then he looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes, no accusation, only disbelief. He is mine, he whispered. It was not a question. I crossed my arms and said nothing. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they were shining with emotions he was no longer trying to hide. 6 years, he said softly. 6 years. I felt old wounds reopening inside my chest. You lost the right to complain about lost time a long time ago. Ethan nodded slowly. To my surprise, he did not argue. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and removed a thin folder. Before you say anything else, I need you to see something. I should have refused. Every instinct told me to walk away. Yet something in his voice made me pause. Ethan slid several documents across the table. At the top was a familiar date. October. 6 years ago. My stomach tightened immediately. Read page 3. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. The document was a legal agreement involving international investors and multiple companies. Halfway down the third page, I found the section Ethan had marked. Then I froze. The agreement was not about me. It was not about a relationship. It was not about keeping me close. The entire discussion had been about Victoria Sinclair, her family's involvement, her position within the merger. Every sentence I read dismantled a piece of the story I had believed for 6 years. That phone call, I whispered. Ethan nodded. Was never about you. The room felt strangely quiet. Then why did you not explain? His expression cracked. Because I never knew. What you heard. You vanished before I had the chance. My heart pounded. Years of certainty suddenly felt fragile, unstable. Ethan pulled one final item from the folder. It was a photograph. A picture of the envelope I had left behind with the engagement ring. I found this the night you disappeared, he said. I spent 6 years trying to understand what happened. For the first time I saw the pain he had carried too. Not as a billionaire. Not as a powerful man. Just as someone who had lost the person he loved. Tears blurred my vision. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then Ethan surprised me again. He stood and slowly lowered himself to one knee. Not dramatically. Not for attention. Just honestly. I am not asking you to forgive 6 years in a single day, he said. I am not even asking you to forgive me. I am only asking for a chance to know my son. And maybe one day a chance to earn your trust again. Outside the office, Noah laughed at something in the hallway. The sound drifted through the open door like sunlight after a storm. And for the first time in 6 years, I realized the revenge I thought I had won had never created a winner at all. It had only left two broken hearts standing on opposite sides of the same misunderstanding. And sometimes the moments that change our lives arrive when we least expect them. Maybe that's the lesson behind this story. Power can protect, love can heal, And even the most broken hearts can find their way home. If this story touched you in any way, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear which moment stayed with you the longest. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next cinematic journey filled with destiny, sacrifice, redemption, and unforgettable love. Until next time, take care of your heart, and never underestimate the power of one unexpected encounter.